Thanks for coming. I want to dedicate this talk to book lovers everywhere, and you're all here, and also to two of my late friends, Bill Pearson and Fred Rudolph, who loved this college and loved its libraries and taught me more about them than I could recount. We are at an amazing moment in time. Right now, on this college, are standing 4 different library buildings that span 2 centuries of the growth of this college. I can't think of another college or university that has anything like it for this moment, this passing moment, because in a year we're going to lose one of these 3 buildings. But it's a wonderful moment, as Christine said, to reflect how we got here and where we're going. The buildings are all very tightly knit, very close to one another. We can walk back and forth between them, thinking about books, light, reading, relaxation, study, all the things that books call to mind. So what I want to do today is just tour these 4 buildings and try to place them in the history of this place and in the history of library design. And there are the dates. First library is now the College Museum, Lawrence Hall, WICMA, and our new building, which I understand is still going to be called, we're going to keep the name Stetson and Sawyer. I am leaving out all the mini libraries that this college has had. The college has had its library at the beginning in West, then in Griffin. There's the Griffin Chapel, which was later used as a reading room. I'm leaving out Scow. I'm only looking at freestanding, purpose-built libraries. Just a little bit of history. The word library in English is an aberration. Every other culture in the world calls it a bibliothek. Bibliothekos from the Greek, a shelf of books. Biblios and tekos, apothecary, apotheka, shelf for drugs. Discotheque is another place for drugs. The earliest images we have of our libraries, the tradition of our libraries, are simply cabinets for books. The first bibliothèques here you see above me, this depiction on the mosaic of the mausoleum of Galla Placidia, where you see a library stores the 4 canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, while the others are being burned as non-canonical. And then this delightful image of the scribe Ezra with his own bookshelf. A small number of books. The first monastic libraries would have counted themselves proud to have had 100 books. What you're looking at here is the transition from the monastic library, which was always connected with a scriptorium. Before there was the printing press, books had to be copied laboriously by hand, and the standard medieval solution was to place a library over the scriptorium, the monks below copying the books that you would read above. And very quickly, the library takes on the contours that we recognize. As early as 1400, in Gloucester Cathedral, we see the first emergence of carrels. Each carrel to be occupied by an individual monk studying here in the cloister, and delightfully human-sized, as my colleague Peter Lowe discovered with his graduate students in winter study last month. But 100 years later, within 100 years, we have the first secular library. This is in the small Italian town of Cesena, but it's the beginning of the humanist idea of a library as a place for disinterested scholarly study. You recognize this one feature, that the books are chained to the lectern, so they're too valuable to allow anyone to slip into their pocket. You'd have to have had colossal pockets to take these books. But notice in these cases that reading and book storage take place in the same room. And then the fully secular libraries of our day, public libraries which have now shed their monastic origins, and they look like public buildings. They look like civic architecture, which is what they are. This state has one of the United States' finest public libraries, the Boston Public Library by McKim, Mead, and White, building opened in 1891. And you could read with beautiful clarity, you could read the plan as a book itself. Entrance in the middle, grand stair behind, the reading room that runs across the entire front of the building, and then the book stacks to the rear. All right, so this in a nutshell is the trajectory of college, of library design. Before we look at how Williams responds to that, we should take a quick capsule view of the history of Williams College architecture. And it can be done very quickly. For 50 years, brick boxes. Every building at Williams for the first half century of our life is in the Georgian style. Late Georgian style, very late. This is really a colonial style. Here in the provincial outskirts of this state, we're still building the way the eastern half of the state built in the mid-18th century. Late Palladian set pieces. Important ones got cupolas to tell you they were buildings of study. Buildings for sleeping don't get a cupola. But essentially, Williams College buildings aren't so much architecture as intelligent Georgian problem solving. Then comes the Victorian era, where every building is not only in a different style, Gothic, Romanesque, Flemish, Lombard, but is in a different shape. The lattice of boxes has been broken. Buildings are now octagons, prisms, rectangles in every style, and even nameless styles. This is Jessup, which when built right after 1905 is stylistically indescribable. I guess as it remains today. Also note the great will to differentiate the buildings, where all the buildings sought to look the same before the 1840s. Now they not only look different in style and shape, but in materials. Brick, brownstone, white dolomite from the valley floor. And it was the chaos of this Victorian welter of competing styles, statements, this Tower of Babel, that the firm of Frederick Law Olmsted and Son was brought in to repair in 1902. Williams College administration asked Olmsted, whose giant brain, you can almost see the size of his brain in this caricature, is responsible for America's great public parks. Central Park, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, Mount Royal in Montreal. And the Olmsted firm made two recommendations, and they were piercingly intelligent. Choose one style and choose one architect, and be consistent. And the college did. For the next 50 years plus, everything at Williams was built in a neo-Georgian, a style, a kind of debonair, unflashy, gentlemanly Georgian. And all of these buildings are by the same architect, whose name I'll say in a minute. Then, though, comes modernism. Modernism comes here late. We were dragged into the 20th century, kicking and screaming almost before it ended, with our modern buildings, the first of which was Bronfman, followed quickly by Greylock, by Ben Thompson. And we're still in the modern period, although if you wanted to be fussy, you could say, well, buildings that have jagged roofs are postmodern, but essentially, Williams is now in its modernist phase. So, what about the libraries? The first building of Williams to house a library was west, and it was a room. It was simply a room which housed books. When Griffin was built, and there is Griffin in its early days, rather forlorn up on top of that hill before they straightened out the topography there, painted white originally, had the chapel and a small library room somewhere upstairs. I haven't been able to find out where exactly because we have no good early plans of Griffin. In 1846, Mark Hopkins, president of Williams, ran into his friend Amos Lawrence Amos Lawrence as this portrait, which we own in the College Museum. I don't need to tell you, he sold textiles, and he seems to have draped himself with everything he had. And Hopkins said, "Can you do something for me? Can you give me money for a building we desperately need, a college library?" "How much?" Lawrence asked. "About $7,000. At that moment, the college had 7,000 books. So at about $1 a book, the library would, if you did the math now, housing an individual book is much more expensive. Lawrence gave the money, and the college commissioned this man to design our library, Thomas Tefft. Look at the dates. He was 19 years old. His birthday was at the end of the year. He designed this building as a pre-freshman. He had just been accepted at Brown University, where he would study. Whenever I show this image to my students, I say, if you plan to change the world when you're young, it's too late. It's too late. I find it very poetic that our only building on this campus of national importance was designed by our youngest architect, a teenager. Tefft was the architect. He was an apprentice in a Providence firm named Tallman and Buckland, as we know from the work of William Pearson. And his first major national building of significance, besides our Lawrence Hall, was the Providence Railroad Station. And if you look at that building, which is in the German Romanesque style, there is a little sublimated Romanesque cathedral portal there. If you look at Tefft's love of polygonal volumes in space, look at this cubic mass, look at these tall spiky forms, look at this octagon, you see a benign prophecy of what he would bring to Williams. Another octagonal shape. This is the origin of Lawrence Hall, completed in 1847. Completed at a moment when America was in the frenzies of a mad craze to build octagonal houses. There's one in Hoosick. It was the demented brainchild of America's most famous phrenologist, the one who reads your personality by the bumps on your head, named Orson Squire Fowler, who showed how it was the most rational shape possible because it enclosed the greatest volume with the smallest surface membrane. And it's a brilliant idea until you start to put your square bed into a pie-shaped room, which is why every town in New England has one of these, but none has two. But the idea behind our library was only partly the octagon craze, although they're very similar. Each of these buildings is about 48 feet across. The inspiration came elsewhere. Here are Tefft's drawings, which survive at the Brown University archives, and it's a very diminutive little jewel box of a building. Downstairs, the administration room's there, rather tortuously inserted into the octagon to give you the stair. And then above, here, a single vessel of space, lighted brilliantly. And the title came to me, A Chalice of Words and Light, looking at that cross-section. How brightly this building must have blazed. Windows on 8 sides, plus an oculus above, raining light down. An extraordinary solution to the library problem of light, storage, and motion. It's a panopticon. Even as the octagonal house craze is sweeping the country, at the other end of the hierarchy of buildings, prison design, the panopticon principle is spreading. This is the first prison in the United States, the first major one in the world, built on the panopticon plan. The idea is that a tiny staff of warden and guards can supervise up to 700 prisoners in their wings. Extrapolated to a library, you have one frowning librarian. malevolently surveying, not really, but all the wings. What I like about this engraving is that it is signed by the artist, Convict 85739, whom I only conclude was in for forgery because it's a very handsome drawing. But the actual source was neither the octagon house nor, I think, prison design. It was this 1835 French design, unbuilt, for a royal library by a French architect and intellect named de la Serre. It's the Nouvelle Bibliothèque Circulaire, projetée, but never réalisée. And the idea was, here in Leviathan form, what Lawrence Hall realized, I believe the first building directly built on de la Serre's principle, just 10 years later. And we know that Tefft had the book in his possession. By the way, our library was the first of a great many panopticon libraries built in the country, and I recently learned it was the first, an architect I'm very fond of in Philadelphia, Frank Furness. His first major work was a panopticon library in Philadelphia called the Mercantile Library, and you see him struggling to insert his panopticon into a building that was really too long for the shape, long since torn down. And there's the interior of the building. Initially, as I said, 7,000 volumes were stored here with an idea that as the book collection continued to grow, a mezzanine could be built up here, eventually expanding the collection of books up to 35,000. And there in this one surviving early photograph, you get a glimmer of what a glistening well of space it was. But libraries grow and continue to grow. By 1888, the library had 19,000 volumes. It had almost tripled its initial capacity. But how do you add to an octagon? You can't really. You can go up, you can go down, but you can't go in any way unless you move in tandem, right and left. And that's what the architect Allen and Collins did 2 years later in 1890 with their two parallel wings. This plan cost $10,000. By the way, I think I skipped over. This is what the space looks like now. It's very, very difficult for us to retrieve how it would have looked filled with light and books. So the library was added to in 1890. And at the same time, the architects felt it needed a little stylistic updating. That Greek Revival portico in the front was starting to seem a little frumpy. So it was given a domestically scaled porch there, which looks vaguely ridiculous to my eye, but there we go. So the library grew and continued to grow because libraries can't stand still. So how do you add once you've put a wing to either side? Well, then you can go to the back. So in 1915, the firm of Allen and Collins did another addition and another one in 1926. And the building invisibly sprawled down the hill towards the athletic center. Here's the problem. The production of books had been transformed by the Industrial Revolution. 3 inventions in particular radically lowered the cost of books. First, strangely enough, the mechanical bookbinder. Books used to be bound by hand. Luxury books still are. They had to be laboriously stitched through the leather, and to do a good job of bookbinding is equivalent to making a nice pair of leather shoes. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money. That's the first device is the steam mechanical binder. Second, the steam-powered mechanical book press. This is the house of Harper's Weekly in New York in the 1850s, which replaced the very labor-intensive hand press. Finally, wood pulp paper in place of cotton rag drastically lower the price of paper. So throughout the 19th century, the price of books plummets, and books are transformed from being rare, valuable objects, which should be displayed, to things that come in heaps every week, 10 and 12,000 a year, that need to be stored. They are no longer individually so precious. This changes the dynamic of college architecture. Amherst, in 1917, right after we built our addition to Lawrence, built its new purpose-built college library by McKim, Mead, and White. Well, not McKim, Mead, and White, because McKim is dead and White is dead, so it's pretty much Mead, and it's a perfectly respectable, that's the best I'll say for it, essay in the late McKim, Mead, and White style. This had a major effect on Williams College, a major effect. It was devastating. After we had invested a considerable amount of money in updating Lawrence, our rival institution, not very far away, had just built a stirringly modern library. Williams turned to its architect, Ralph Adams Cram. Cram, as we saw, was the architect who fulfilled old Olmsted's demand that one architect do everything at the college. Typically, in Cram's work, he preferred the Gothic. Half of Princeton is by Cram, and it's all Gothic. This is the Princeton University Chapel. Most of West Point is by Cram. It's all Gothic. The Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York is by Cram, and it's Gothic. But at Williams, Cram preferred to work in the gentleman Georgian style that we saw. His first design for Stetson survives only in a blueprint. It's quite different than what was built. If you notice, the major departure is the reading room ran across the whole back of the building, right, to the east. There's the south there. It doesn't yet have the separate entrance for the Chapin Library. I see Bob Volz is out there. And it would have been brilliantly performing, because what Cram did, I don't know if you can read this, you come in here and the first thing you see is the librarian's desk between two flanks of card catalogs. You would look up the book you wanted to read, hand your card to the librarian, who would page it. It would be brought up by one of these dumbwaiters. You would take the book and move into the reading room. Beautifully logical. And now the books are kept below, safe and stored out of sight. But there's a problem. I think Cram recognized that this didn't admit to easy additions. So what he did was move the reading room to the side, brought the stack up a story, and pushed it to the back, permitting the stacks to expand out as long as they needed to. And for the next 40 years, that solution guaranteed more book storage space. There's the reading room as built. And I can't help but think, how different it is from Lawrence. Look at Lawrence, books and readers brought close together, eyeball to eyeball. Here, we've got the sense more of a corporate boardroom rather than a gentleman scholar's study. And I think it's only fitting that this building was paid for by Francis Stedman, who after all was J.P. Morgan's personal attorney. It does seem to look like a sublimated law office. But actually, I think what Cram was doing was topping Amherst. That's Amherst reading room. And it's really the same room, but with a lot of expensive porticos added to it. There's the building as built in that gentleman Georgian style, which nicely nods to Chapin and Williams and Sage beyond, all by Cram. But that serene and tranquil emblem of Georgian calm and repose ends when you walk to the back of the building where all hell breaks loose. Oops, all hell breaks loose there as the building cascades down the hill by some amphibian instinct slithering towards Boston somehow. And you see the successive additions. All gone now, all gone up to this line in demolitions. Well, this is the problem. This is the problem the college confronted in 1970 when yet again it realized it did not want to be put in the position of building another range of stacks. The college at this point had 365,000 books. It estimated by the end of the century it would have 1 million books. A new library was needed. And, well, that'll do. A new library was needed, but every college and every university in the country was building a new library in the 1960s, from Bowdoin and Bryn Mawr to Berkeley, just to do the B's. Major new libraries were built, but there's a reason for the timing, the peculiar timing, and that is, first, the Depression, 1929, guarantees that no college libraries will be built in the 30s. Then comes World War II, none will be built in the 40s. The 50s are a time of consolidation and establishment of identity. But it's really the 1960s is the great boom in higher education. And college after college built one of these major new libraries and planted it right in the center of the campus as an emblem of pride. Williams did that too with this building. And you're looking at the preliminary design by Ben Weiss, the Chicago architect, who is still alive, who actually designed it in collaboration with his wife. The idea was this library would store up to 650,000 books for the next 20 years, and a small discrete addition up here could guarantee 1 million books up to the year 2000. That was the plan. By the way, 1970 was not a great year for architectural rendering, if I can say that. Compare the plan of Stetson with the plan of Sawyer. What do you notice? What's the critical difference? Stetson is an egg crate of rooms, room. Every function in good classical architectural fashion, analyzed, segregated, separated, and expressed. There are no rooms in Sawyer. Well, Dave Pilichowski gets a room, but only Dave. But basically, the library is flowing, fluid, continuous space with as little partition or barriers or walls as possible. What this is a new conception of the productive work environment pioneered actually by Bell Labs in the late 1950s with the idea that people work better when they constantly talk with other people, compare notes, bump into their friends, and make felicitous discoveries. There is a very sad Jack Lemmon in The Apartment, if you've seen that profoundly depressing movie. So what you get in Sawyer, which you didn't have in Stetson, is the reading of books bleeding into the storage of books in a kind of living topography of different shapes of furniture, little womb-like enclosures where the carrels are sunk reassuringly below floor level. A whole range of purpose-designed and purpose-built furniture by Weiss. The most intelligent thing Weiss did, I believe, was also responsible for the biggest problem of this building. I said after the 1960s, every college planted their library right in the center of their campus, and then they suddenly realized the problem. A college library has one door. It's a security issue. So what, in effect, they did was plant the Rock of Gibraltar right in the middle of their campus, creating an impermeable barrier. Wies observed, studied, and corrected this by placing a channel right through the middle of the building. You see in section here. And even his freehand rendering tells you that. He shows you the tree beyond, that the building is diaphanous. It need not be a barrier to movement across the campus. It would have been wonderful if it worked. But here's why it doesn't work. Do you notice something? Steps up. And that's the logical path of motion in a library. What is a library? It is going to the light. And here you physically enlighten yourself by rising upward. However, there's the rendering, there's the reality. The town found the building a little too high, would not grant a building permit, and the trustees of Williams, in their not to be questioned wisdom, simply took the building and pushed it down a little into the ground so that windows that would have been above ground sort of vanished below. The result that the pleasant journey upwards becomes a dank passage downwards, which in my mind creates, and I don't think we can blame Wies for that, creates the saddest aspect of this building. To take out a DVD, one must go down to go up to go down. No. Libraries don't stand still. It is the law of life that we all grow and change, but libraries more than any building. The library continued to change. The card catalogs were still clanking away when I got here in 1993. They were removed. Students who've never used a card catalog, this is what they look like in plan. There's a table there, so you could take out the entire set of index cards, consult them right down there. They left. The problem that Wies didn't anticipate, but you and the library staff have come to live with, is that what seemed so wonderfully fluid and flexible, no dedicated rooms, means that people can claim space. So bit by bit, new fiefdoms were created. Space that was intended for students was gobbled up by the necessarily changing administrative apparatus of the library. Over the 40 years since this library was built, 200 student seats have vanished. This is one of the motivating factors behind the decision in 2002 to consult with architects to see what could be done. And this is the genesis of the new library. The first thing that Peter Bolin looked at, BCJ Architects, Peter Bolin, who comes like my friend Fred Rudolph from the city of Wilkes-Barre, as do I, the first thing that Bolin considered was expanding the library. Right? The idea would have been to take this library and see if you couldn't possibly take this footprint and add onto it. At the same time, amputating the no longer needed book offices and building 2 academic buildings. That was the initial proposal. But then it was concluded that it would be much more efficient, and what that would have looked like, what was then concluded would be far more efficient to return Stetson to its original function as a library, build a new library behind it, and add two new classroom buildings to either side. The library itself was studied beginning in 2003 over an 11-year design process, and you see here in these first ideograms the principle of it. Original Stetson will be returned to its function, which it serves so gloriously, as a head house to the library. The new library will expand beyond it, and in this cross-section you see how the building now will exploit the fact of the radical drop of the site behind. So you enter at this level, and the building drops away before you, this grand axis of motion now becoming a forward movement into light and space. Down this extraordinary stair hall, which drops away How many of you have been there? Some of you have seen it? Half of you have already seen it. This is an early rendering. It's been realized a little differently. And there is the library, now under construction, that will finish in a year. Well, that brings us pretty much up to speed. But I have some afterthoughts, some important afterthoughts. In a way, as radical as this building is, it is a return to the solution of Stetson in 1919. It once again designates and dedicates an area for the storage of books and a separate area for the reading of books. It has recognized that a purely fluid, flexible solution to the interior of a library does not work as a process of hardening of the arteries occurs. So strangely, Williams has gone back in time to this solution. These are the 4 libraries, and I don't know if you realize, but I left something out. I spoke about plan, style, materials, and architects. What did I leave out? Probably the most important thing of all. Let me conclude by saying that when you look at a building, you must engage meaningfully with the function of the building rather than style or data or architect to understand what you're doing. Every one of these building solutions contended with the same problem. How do people read today? So let's go back. How did they read in 1846? They read the Bible. Williams College was a school for grooming Puritan ministers. The 7,000 books in the library, and the catalog is online, about 5,000 of them were theological. There's no fiction, there's no science, there is very little history writing. It was a school for grooming ministers. The library itself was not a place to read these books. You don't browse the Bible with your foot up on a hassock. This was a place to check out books, take them to your room. When you checked it out, you were obligated to cover it with a brown paper wrapper to protect it. There were no plastic book sleeves then. The library policy I have printed for you here. These are the opening hours of Lawrence Hall. Junior sophisters shall have the privilege of borrowing and returning books every Wednesday afternoon. Seniors also. I missed the first line of that. Sophomores and freshmen every Saturday afternoon in term time. The library was open 2 days a week in the afternoon. You rushed in and rushed out. It was not a space for reading. This changes in 1919 because the college has changed. What has happened at Williams over the course of the 19th century is a great ramification in the students and the faculty. For the first time in the late 19th century, you have very poor students and very rich students. Previous, you had the sons of farmers who were becoming clergymen. You now have professors who are not of the same social world as the students they teach. It's a very variegated population, and what is very important is assimilation. So the building creates this delightfully sublime fiction of an idyllic world of Georgian gentlemen, where you study, not as we do, slouching. You study in jackets and tie, pretty much at attention, it seems. It is an instrument for bringing the student body into a homogeneous set of values. And they now read studiously works by the professors who for the first time are now actually publishing research. The German model of the research institution has come to Williams. And there was not enough space in Lawrence, so you see the chapel was then claimed for reading. Sawyer Library also faced a different kind of reading. Students would now inhabit the library almost 24 hours a day, and the types of furniture that Ben Wees designed were for inhabitation. In fact, they look like little ant colonies, the carol train. If you read if you read the first brochure that Ben Weiss submitted with his design in 1970, he spoke glowingly of the new technologies that would transform the library. He named them the microfilm, the microform, the phonograph, and the Xerox machine. Right? So the library is now a house of technology, and the building has expanded to take that into account. What about today? Reading is changing. It's changing rapidly. This is a slide actually where I just took at the beginning of, yeah, you're right there. You're right in that seat. Our students read differently than we did. They read differently, but they also research differently. There are only 2 spaces in Sawyer Library for students to collaborate. In the new library, there will be 16 to 18 rooms for collaborative work. In Sawyer, there are no computer tables where 2 students can sit and work together. That will not be the case in the new library, which is not, I propose, a solution to the library problem, but it is the best hypothesis I can imagine for how students might be reading in years to come. A final thought. The library has good features and bad features. I'm not entirely happy with some of the exterior. I'm going to reserve judgment till it's done. But let me leave you with the idea that the library will be giving us one gift, a great new public space. Because when Sawyer finally leaves us next year, a grand mall will open stretching from Stetson to Chapin, the new spine leading all the way to the 62 Center. And as far as I know, I can't think of any other college which built a new library and simultaneously gave the campus a new building and a great new public space. And for this, I'm thankful, and that you all came out tonight in this winter night, I'm also thankful. Thank you.